The train whistle pierced through the silence of the dusty platform, as Olivia Zimmerman clutched her worn leather suitcase tightly, her knuckles white with anticipation and fear. April 1875 had brought her from Boston to Willow Creek, Wyoming, a town that existed as little more than a speck on the map she'd studied for weeks before her journey. The letter in her pocket, now creased and softened from countless readings, had promised her a new life, a husband, and perhaps even love, though she dared not hope too boldly for the latter. Passengers disembarked around her, reuniting with loved ones in a flurry of embraces and exclamations. Olivia stood motionless, scanning the crowd for the man who'd written to her Arthur Blackfield, her arranged husband-to-be. The platform gradually emptied as travelers dispersed into town, leaving Olivia alone with nothing but the hot western sun beating down on her pale skin and the distant sound of a piano drifting from the saloon across the street. 3 hours passed. Olivia remained seated on a bench outside the station, her hope dwindling with each passing minute. The station master had given her sympathetic glances throughout the afternoon, but now even he was preparing to lock up for the day. "Miss," he called to her, his voice gentle with pity. "I'm afraid I've got to close up now. You sure there's somebody coming for you?" Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Perhaps he was detained." The station master shook his head. "Town's not big enough for someone to be 3 hours late, miss. You might want to consider other arrangements. The Willow Inn's just down the street, though it ain't much." As the station master locked the station door behind him with a definitive click, Olivia felt the last of her composure crumble. Tears welled in her eyes, sliding down her cheeks in silent streams. The reality of her situation crashed upon her alone, nearly penniless, and abandoned in a strange town over 1,000 miles from home. "No one came for me," she whispered, the words catching in her throat as a sob escaped her lips. "Pardon me, madam, but are you all right?" The deep voice startled her, and Olivia looked up to find a tall man standing before her. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes that seemed to hold genuine concern. Dust covered his clothing, dark trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a leather vest that had clearly seen better days. A cowboy, by all appearances. Embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment, Olivia hastily wiped at her tears. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, her voice betraying her with a slight quiver. The man shifted his weight, pushing his hat back slightly to reveal kind eyes the color of warm whiskey. "Forgive me for saying so, madam, but you don't look fine. You've been sitting here since the noon train arrived." Olivia looked up at him in surprise. "You noticed me then?" "Hard not to notice the only person left at the station for half the day," he replied with a gentle smile. "I reckon you're waiting for someone who hasn't shown." Fresh tears threatened at his accurate assessment, and Olivia couldn't find the strength to deny it. "I was to meet a man named Arthur Blackfield. We've been corresponding for months. He was to be my husband." The cowboy's expression darkened. "Arthur Blackfield." He removed his hat completely now, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "Madam, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Arthur Blackfield died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him fast." The news hit Olivia like a physical blow. "Dead," she whispered. "But that can't be." "I received a letter from him just before I departed Boston." "Letters take time to travel east," he said gently. "The news wouldn't have reached you before you left." A fresh wave of tears escaped, and Olivia no longer tried to hide them. "No one came for me," she cried softly, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her shoulders. The cowboy crouched down to meet her gaze, his eyes filled with compassion rather than pity. "My name's Matthew Cooper, madam. I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "If you've got nowhere to go, then you'll leave with me instead." Olivia stared at him, shock momentarily replacing her despair. "I beg your pardon." "Not like that," Matthew said quickly, a slight flush coloring his tan cheeks. "I've got a spare room in my house. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do next, whether that's heading back east or—" He gestured vaguely toward the town, "finding your place here." "Why would you help me?" Olivia asked, suspicious despite her desperate circumstances. Matthew stood and replaced his hat, shrugging slightly. "Because it's the decent thing to do, and decent things are in short supply out here sometimes." He extended a weathered hand to her. "What do you say, Miss Zimmerman?" "Olivia Zimmerman," she replied, hesitating before placing her gloved hand in his. "And I don't believe I have much choice but to accept your kindness, Mr. Cooper." His warm hand engulfed hers as he helped her to her feet. "Just Matthew is fine, and there's always a choice, Miss Zimmerman. I'm just offering you one that doesn't involve spending your last dollars at the Willow Inn, which I don't recommend for a lady traveling alone." Olivia picked up her suitcase, but Matthew gently took it from her. "My wagon's just down the street. We should get going if we want to reach the ranch before dark." As they walked, Olivia felt the stares of the townsfolk following them. A mail-order bride arriving for a dead man. Now leaving with Matthew Cooper, she could practically hear the gossip that would spread by morning. "People are watching us," she murmured. Matthew didn't look around. "People in small towns don't have much better to do. Pay them no mind." They reached a wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. Matthew loaded her suitcase and helped her onto the wooden seat before climbing up beside her. With a click of his tongue and a gentle snap of the reins, the horses pulled away from Willow Creek. As the town receded behind them, Olivia took in the vast, open landscape stretching before them. The rolling plains, dotted with sagebrush and distant mesas, were so different from the crowded, bustling streets of Boston. The enormity of the change, of the mistake she might have made in coming west, threatened to overwhelm her again. "It's a lot to take in," Matthew said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "But there's beauty here once you get used to looking for it." Olivia didn't respond, her mind racing with questions and fears. Who was this man really? Could she trust him? What would become of her now? "I should tell you," Matthew continued, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, "I've got a boy at home. My son, Peter, he's 8. "You're married, then?" Olivia asked, surprised by the strange disappointment she felt at the thought. Matthew shook his head. "Widowed, going on 3 years now. Influenza took my Sarah." "I'm sorry for your loss," Olivia said softly. "Thank you. Peter and we get by. Got a housekeeper who comes in from town 3 times a week. Mrs. Holloway. She'll be there tomorrow, so you'll have another woman around if that makes you more comfortable." The consideration touched her. "That's very thoughtful." They fell into silence as the wagon rumbled over the uneven trail. Olivia stole glances at her unexpected savior, noting the strength in his hands as he handled the reins. The lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often despite the hardships he'd mentioned. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, a cluster of buildings appeared in the distance: a large main house, a barn, and several smaller structures that made up the Cooper Ranch. As they drew closer, Olivia could see a small figure waiting on the porch of the main house. "That's Peter," Matthew explained. "He's probably been watching for me since sundown started." The boy ran out to meet them as Matthew brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He was all gangly limbs and unruly brown hair, with his father's same warm eyes. "Pa." He called excitedly, then stopped short when he noticed Olivia. Confusion and curiosity battled across his young face. Matthew jumped down from the wagon and lifted his son into a quick hug. "Peter, this is Miss Zimmerman. She'll be staying with us for a while." The boy stared openly at Olivia. "Are you going to be my new ma, Peter?" Matthew admonished, his face flushing. "That's not appropriate. Miss Zimmerman is our guest. She had some trouble in town and we're helping her out." Olivia felt heat rise to her own cheeks as Matthew helped her down from the wagon. "It's nice to meet you, Peter," she said, extending her hand formally. The boy shook it with surprising solemnity. "Did you bring your own food?" he asked, eyeing her suitcase. "Pa's cooking isn't very good." Despite everything, Olivia found herself laughing. "No, I'm afraid I didn't." "Then I hope you like beans and biscuits," Peter said with dramatic resignation. "'Cause that's all Pa knows how to make that don't taste like leather." "That's enough commentary on my cooking skills," Matthew said, ruffling his son's hair. "Why don't you go feed the chickens while I show Miss Zimmerman to the guest room?" As Peter ran off to complete his chore, Matthew carried Olivia's suitcase toward the house. "I apologize for his bluntness. We don't get many visitors out here, especially not ladies." The main house was larger than Olivia had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, the furnishings were simple but well-made. A large table dominated the kitchen. Comfortable-looking chairs surrounded a stone fireplace in the main room, and hand-woven rugs softened the wooden floors. "It's lovely," Olivia said, genuinely surprised by the homey atmosphere. "My wife had a way with making a house feel like a home," Matthew explained. "I've tried to keep it that way for Peter's sake." He led her up a narrow staircase to a small but clean bedroom at the end of a short hallway. A hand-stitched quilt covered the bed, and lace curtains framed the window that overlooked the distant mountains. "This was Sarah's sewing room," Matthew explained as he set down her suitcase. "We turned it into a proper bedroom after she was gone. Mrs. Holloway keeps it ready for guests, though we don't get many." Olivia wandered to the window, taking in the vast landscape stretching toward the horizon. "It's beautiful here." "It can be hard country, but yes, it has its beauty," Matthew agreed. "I'll let you get settled. Wash basins on the dresser there. Outhouse is out back. We usually eat around sundown, so whenever you're ready, come on down." Left alone, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to her. She had come west to marry a man she'd never met, only to discover he was dead. Now she was staying in a stranger's home, with no clear plan for what would come next. Tears threatened again, but Olivia forced them back. Crying would solve nothing. She needed to be practical now. She opened her suitcase and changed from her traveling dress into a simpler blue frock, washed her face in the basin, and repinned her honey blonde hair. Looking in the small mirror above the dresser, she hardly recognized herself. The confident young woman who had boarded the train in Boston seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone with uncertain eyes and trembling hands. "You'll be fine," she whispered to her reflection. "You'll figure this out." By the time Olivia made her way downstairs, Matthew and Peter had already set the table. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the kitchen with the aroma of beans and bacon. "Hope you're hungry," Matthew said with a slightly self-conscious smile. "It's not fancy, but it fills the stomach." "It smells wonderful," Olivia replied, genuinely appreciating the simple meal after her long journey. "Can I help with anything?" "Already done," Matthew said, gesturing for her to sit. "Peter's quite the assistant cook when he wants to be." The boy beamed at the praise as they settled around the table. Matthew said a brief grace, and then they began to eat. The meal was indeed simple beans with bacon, fresh biscuits that were slightly overdone on the bottom, and sliced apples, but to Olivia's hungry stomach, it tasted better than many of the formal dinners she'd attended back east. Peter dominated the conversation, asking Olivia an endless stream of questions about Boston, the train journey, and whether she'd seen any Indians on her way west. Matthew occasionally reminded him to let their guest eat, but Olivia found she didn't mind the boy's curiosity. His enthusiasm was a welcome distraction from her worries. "Did you really come all this way to marry a man you never met?" Peter asked abruptly, causing Matthew to nearly choke on his biscuit. "Peter, that's enough questions for tonight," Matthew said firmly. "It's all right," Olivia assured him, then turned to Peter. "Yes, I did. It's called being a mail-order bride. It's quite common for women to travel west to marry men they've only written letters to." "But why?" Peter pressed. Olivia considered how to answer in a way an 8-year-old would understand. "Sometimes women in the East don't have many opportunities. After my parents died last year, I had few options. Mr. Blackfield's letters seemed kind, and he offered a new beginning. And now he's dead," Peter stated matter-of-factly. "So what will you do instead, Peter?" Matthew warned again. Olivia gave a slight smile. "I don't know yet, but your father has been kind enough to give me a place to stay while I figure it out." "You could stay here," Peter suggested brightly. "Pa needs help, and Mrs. Holloway says a woman's touch would do this place good." "That's quite enough," Matthew said, his tone brooking no argument. "Miss Zimmerman is our guest, not our housekeeper. Now it's time for you to wash up and get ready for bed." After some protest, Peter reluctantly said goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving Olivia alone with Matthew. An awkward silence fell between them as Matthew began clearing the dishes. "Please, let me help," Olivia said, standing to gather the remaining plates. "You don't need to. You're our guest." "I'd like to earn my keep, even if it's just for a short while." Matthew studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." They worked side by side in companionable silence, washing and drying the dishes. Olivia found the simple domesticity oddly comforting after the turmoil of the day. "I should apologize for Peter," Matthew said as he put away the last of the clean dishes. "He hasn't had much exposure to proper manners, living out here with just me most of the time." "There's no need to apologize. His honesty is refreshing, actually." Matthew leaned against the counter, regarding her with curious eyes. "If you don't mind my asking, what did you know about Arthur Blackfield?" Olivia sighed, resting her hands on the back of one of the kitchen chairs. "Not much, in truth. He wrote that he had a small ranch, that he was 36 years old and had never been married. He said he was looking for a partner, not just a housekeeper or, well, you understand." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. His letters were well-written, respectful. "I thought perhaps I could build a life with him in time." "Arthur was a decent man," Matthew said quietly. "Kept to himself mostly, but he was honest in his dealings. His place is about 5 miles from here to the west." "What will happen to his ranch now?" Matthew shrugged. "Bank will likely claim it. He didn't have any family that I know of." Olivia felt a pang of sadness for the man she would never meet. It seemed such a waste. "That's the way of things out here sometimes," Matthew replied. "Life can be harsh, and death doesn't always wait for proper goodbyes." They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire in the hearth the only sound in the room. "I'll need to find work," Olivia said finally. "I have some savings, but not enough to return east even if I wanted to." "What skills do you have?" "I was a teacher in Boston for young children. I'm also proficient in sewing, cooking, and household management." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Willow Creek doesn't have a proper school yet. Most families teach their children at home if they bother to teach them at all. But Mrs. Holloway mentioned the mercantile is looking for help. The owner's wife is expecting their 3rd child, and she can't manage the store alone anymore. That sounds promising, Olivia said, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time since arriving. Would you be willing to take me into town tomorrow to inquire? Of course. I need to pick up supplies anyway. Matthew pushed away from the counter. You must be tired after your journey. Don't feel you need to stay up on my account. Olivia realized how exhausted she truly was, the emotional and physical toll of the day weighing heavily upon her. You're right. I should retire. Matthew walked her to the base of the stairs. If you need anything in the night, my room is the first door at the top of the stairs. Peter's is next to it. Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for everything. Matthew, he corrected gently. And you're welcome, Miss Zimmerman. Olivia, she offered in return. A small smile curved his lips. Good night then, Olivia. Good night, Matthew. Olivia climbed the stairs slowly, her mind a whirl of contradictory thoughts and emotions. She had come west expecting to be a wife by nightfall, and instead found herself a guest in a widower's home, with no clear future ahead. Yet somehow, as she prepared for bed in the small, cozy room, she felt less afraid than she had on the train journey west. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion, or perhaps it was the unexpected kindness of Matthew Cooper and his son, but for the first time since receiving Arthur Blackfield's first letter, Olivia felt that perhaps, just perhaps, things might work out after all. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the lace curtains and the distant sound of a rooster announcing the dawn. For a moment, Olivia was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the previous day's events rushed back the empty train platform, the news of Arthur Blackfield's death, and the unexpected sanctuary offered by Matthew Cooper. Olivia rose and dressed quickly in a practical brown skirt and cream-colored blouse. She could hear movement downstairs, the clatter of pans, and the murmur of voices indicating Matthew and Peter were already awake. The aroma of coffee and something sweet wafted up the stairs, making her stomach growl in anticipation. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Peter setting the table while Matthew stood at the stove, turning what appeared to be flapjacks in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," Olivia greeted them. Peter's face lit up. "You're still here. I thought maybe you'd be gone." "Peter," Matthew admonished, but there was no real rebuke in his tone. He turned to Olivia with a slight smile. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Can I help with breakfast?" "Already under control," Matthew replied, sliding a golden brown flapjack onto a plate. "Coffee's fresh, though, if you'd like some." Olivia poured herself a cup, surprised by the domesticity of the scene. For a man and boy living primarily on their own, the Cooper household ran with surprising efficiency. "Miss Zimmerman, do you know how to ride a horse?" Peter asked as they sat down to breakfast. "I'm afraid not," Olivia replied. "There wasn't much call for horsemanship in Boston." "Pa could teach you," the boy suggested enthusiastically. "He's the best rider in the county. Everyone says so." Matthew cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed by his son's praise. "I'm sure Miss Zimmerman has more important things to worry about than learning to ride." "Actually, I would like to learn," Olivia said. "If I'm to stay in Wyoming, it seems a necessary skill." A look of surprise crossed Matthew's face. "You're considering staying, then?" "I don't have many alternatives," Olivia admitted, "and I did come west seeking a new beginning. Perhaps I can still find one, even if it's not the one I expected." A strange expression flickered across Matthew's features, something Olivia couldn't quite decipher before it disappeared behind his usual reserved demeanor. "Well, we'll see about riding lessons another time. Today, we need to get you into town to talk to Mr. Dawson at the Mercantile." After breakfast, Olivia helped clear away the dishes while Matthew went to hitch the wagon. Peter trailed after her, peppering her with questions about Boston and asking if she knew any stories she could tell him. "My pa doesn't know many stories," he explained as Olivia washed the last plate, "and I've read all my books so many times I know them by heart." "Perhaps we could find you some new books in town," Olivia suggested. "I'd be happy to read to you sometime." Peter's face lit up at the prospect, but before he could respond, Matthew called from outside that the wagon was ready. "Can I come too, Pa?" Peter called as they stepped onto the porch. Matthew shook his head. "Not today, son. You've got chores to finish and Mrs. Holloway will be here soon to check on you." Peter's disappointment was evident, but he didn't argue. "Will you bring me something from town?" "We'll see," Matthew replied, the universal parental response that neither promised nor denied. Olivia gave Peter a reassuring smile. "Perhaps I can find a book you haven't read yet." This brightened the boy's mood considerably, and he waved enthusiastically as Matthew helped Olivia into the wagon and set off toward town. The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze tempering the heat of the early summer sun. As they traveled, Matthew pointed out landmarks and shared bits of information about the area where the best fishing spots were, which distant mountain peaks had names, and the boundaries of his own property. "How long have you lived here?" Olivia asked as they passed a fork in the trail. "Going on 10 years now," Matthew replied. "Came west after the war looking for a fresh start, worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny. When this place came up for sale, I took a chance." "And your wife, was she already out west?" A shadow passed over Matthew's features, but his expression remained gentle. "Sarah came out from Pennsylvania as a mail-order bride like yourself, only she was meant for the banker in Willow Creek. Mr. Prescott was his name." "What happened?" Matthew's mouth quirked up in a half-smile. She took one look at him and decided 30 years age difference and a fondness for brandy weren't to her liking. "She was working at the hotel when we met. 6 months later we were married." Olivia couldn't help but smile at the story. "She sounds like a woman who knew her own mind." "That she was," Matthew agreed, a wistful note in his voice. "Strong-willed but tender-hearted. She made this place a real home." They fell silent for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves filling the space between them. Olivia found herself studying Matthew's profile, the straight nose. The firm jaw softened slightly by his expression as he reminisced about his late wife. There was an undeniable kindness to him, a quiet strength that was reassuring rather than intimidating. "Can I ask you something, Matthew?" Olivia said finally. "Of course." "Why did you offer to help me? Truly, you could have simply directed me to the hotel or the sheriff's office." Matthew considered the question for a long moment. "I suppose I saw something in your face that reminded me of Sarah when she first arrived in Willow Creek. Lost, but determined not to show it. Scared, but brave all the same." He glanced at her briefly. "And like I said, it seemed the decent thing to do." Olivia wasn't entirely satisfied with his answer, but decided not to press further. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful for his intervention. As they approached Willow Creek, the town looked different in the morning light, less intimidating than it had seemed the previous day. Several stores lined the main street, with the mercantile prominently positioned near the center of town. People moved about their business, some pausing to watch as Matthew's wagon rolled past. "Word travels fast in small towns," Matthew explained, noticing Olivia's discomfort under the scrutiny. "By now, everyone knows Arthur Blackfield's mail-order bride arrived yesterday and left with me instead." "What must they think?" Olivia murmured, mortified at the implications. "Doesn't matter what they think," Matthew said firmly. "We know the truth of it." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the mercantile. a large wooden building with a wide porch, and a sign proclaiming Dawson's General Store in faded paint. Before helping Olivia down, Matthew turned to her with a serious expression. "Jacob Dawson's a fair man, but he's particular about who he hires. Speak plainly with him and don't be afraid to show what you know." Olivia nodded, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her skirt. "I understand." Inside, the mercantile was a treasure trove of goods shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to fabric, tools hanging from the walls, and barrels of flour and sugar positioned strategically around the floor. A bespectacled man with a neatly trimmed beard was helping a customer at the counter, while a visibly pregnant woman arranged a display of canned peaches nearby. Matthew approached the woman with a polite tip of his hat. "Morning, Mrs. Dawson. This is Miss Olivia Zimmerman. She's new to town and looking for employment." Mrs. Dawson turned, her hands automatically moving to support her lower back as she assessed Olivia with curious blue eyes. "You're the one who came for Arthur Blackfield," she stated matter-of-factly. "Yes, madam," Olivia confirmed, resisting the urge to shrink under the woman's direct gaze. To her surprise, Mrs. Dawson's expression softened. "That's a hard piece of luck, Miss Zimmerman. Arthur was a good man." "So I've been told," Olivia replied quietly. Mrs. Dawson gestured toward her husband, who was finishing up with his customer. "Jacob, come meet Miss Zimmerman. She's inquiring about the position." Mr. Dawson approached, his keen eyes assessing Olivia thoroughly. "Matthew," he acknowledged with a nod before turning his attention to Olivia. "My wife tells me you're looking for work, Miss Zimmerman." "Yes, sir. I understand you might be in need of assistance in your store." "That we are," he confirmed, glancing at his wife's rounded belly. "Elizabeth needs to take things easier these days, and I can't manage the books and the customers all on my own. Have you any experience in a mercantile?" "I haven't worked in a store before," Olivia admitted, "but I was a teacher in Boston, so I'm proficient with numbers and record keeping. I learn quickly and I'm not afraid of hard work." Mr. Dawson stroked his beard thoughtfully. "A teacher, you say? Can you write a fair hand, read invoices?" "Yes, sir, quite easily. And you can count change without mistake. Some of our customers can't read numbers, so they rely on our honesty." "I would never shortchange anyone," Olivia assured him firmly. A hint of approval crossed Mr. Dawson's features. "Where are you staying in town, Miss Zimmerman?" Olivia hesitated, aware of how her answer might be perceived. "Currently, I'm a guest at Mr. Cooper's ranch, but I intend to find lodgings in town once I secure employment." Mr. Dawson raised an eyebrow, glancing at Matthew. "Is that so?" Matthew met his gaze steadily. "Miss Zimmerman needed assistance after learning of Arthur's passing. I offered her our guest room temporarily. Mrs. Holloway is at the house as we speak." The mention of Mrs. Holloway seemed to reassure the merchant. He turned back to Olivia. "The position pays $15 a month, plus a small room above the store if you need it. Hours are long, 6 days a week from opening to close with Sundays off for church. Still interested?" "Yes, sir, very much so," Olivia replied, hope blossoming in her chest. "Can you start tomorrow?" Olivia glanced at Matthew, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Yes, I can." "Good. Come by at 7 in the morning. Elizabeth will show you what needs doing." Mr. Dawson extended his hand and Olivia shook it firmly. "Welcome to Dawson's, Miss Zimmerman." "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I won't disappoint you." As they exited the mercantile, Olivia could barely contain her excitement. "I have a job," she said, the reality of it setting in. "My first day in Willow Creek and I already have employment and lodging." Matthew smiled, genuinely pleased for her. "Congratulations. The Dawsons are good people. You'll be treated fairly there." A thought occurred to Olivia, dimming her enthusiasm slightly. I'll need to gather my things from your home. I don't want to impose any longer than necessary." "There's no rush," Matthew assured her. "You're welcome to stay until you're settled in your new position. Besides, I promised Peter I'd teach you to ride, remember?" Olivia laughed, her spirits lifting again. "So you did. I wouldn't want to disappoint him." They spent the next hour completing Matthew's errands, purchasing supplies at the mercantile, where Mr. Dawson already treated Olivia with the respect due a future employee, stopping by the blacksmith to arrange for a horse to be shod, and finally visiting the small bookshop where Olivia selected a volume of adventure stories she thought Peter might enjoy. As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. A crowd had gathered around two men engaged in a heated argument that seemed on the verge of turning physical. "Wait here," Matthew instructed, helping Olivia back into the wagon before approaching the scene. Olivia watched as he spoke quietly to one of the bystanders, then frowned at whatever information he received. He moved toward the altercation with purpose, his posture changing subtly, shoulders squared, stance widened. There was an authority to him that she hadn't noticed before. One of the arguing men, a rough-looking character with a week's growth of beard and bloodshot eyes, took a swing at the other. Before the punch could connect, Matthew stepped between them, catching the man's wrist in a firm grip. "That's enough, Drake," Matthew said, his voice carrying clearly to where Olivia sat. "You're drunk before noon again, and Sheriff Miller won't take kindly to another disturbance." "Mind your own business, Cooper," the man snarled, trying unsuccessfully to free his arm from Matthew's grasp. "When you're threatening decent folk in the middle of the street, you make it my business," Matthew replied evenly. The second man, younger and clearly intimidated, began backing away from the confrontation. Drake noticed and lunged for him, but Matthew maintained his hold, preventing any pursuit. "Let him go, Drake. Whatever quarrel you have, it can wait until you're sober." For a tense moment, it seemed Drake might turn his aggression on Matthew, but something in the cowboy's steady gaze must have given him pause. With a final curse, Drake yanked his arm free and stumbled back toward the saloon. The crowd dispersed as Matthew returned to the wagon, his expression troubled. "Is everything all right?" Olivia asked as he climbed up beside her. "Fine," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Drake Simmons has a habit of picking fights when he's been drinking, which is most days. Usually harmless, but occasionally he works himself into a real temper." "You handled him well," Olivia observed. "He looked ready to fight anyone, but he backed down from you." A hint of a smile touched Matthew's lips. "Drake and I have had our run-ins before. He knows I don't bluff." He picked up the reins and clicked to the horses. "Let's head back. Peter will be wondering where we've got to." As they drove away from town, Olivia found herself studying Matthew with new interest. There were clearly depths to the quiet rancher that she hadn't yet fathomed, a natural authority that commanded respect, a willingness to intervene when needed, and a gentle strength that seemed to permeate everything he did. For the first time, she wondered what it might have been like if Matthew Cooper had been her intended husband rather than Arthur Blackfield. The thought startled her with its impropriety, and she pushed it firmly aside. Matthew was her benefactor, nothing more a kind man helping a woman in distress. Any other considerations were premature at best and inappropriate at worst. Yet as they traveled the dusty road back to the Cooper ranch, Olivia couldn't help but feel that in the space of a day, her life had shifted course in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The future that had seemed so bleak at the train station now held possibilities she had yet to discover. Peter was waiting eagerly for their return, rushing out to meet the wagon before Matthew had even brought it to a complete stop. "Did you bring me something? Did you get a job?" he asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. Olivia laughed, charmed by his enthusiasm. Yes to both questions. I start work at the Mercantile tomorrow and I found you this. She handed him the book of adventure stories, watching as his face lit up with delight. Stories about pirates and explorers, he exclaimed, already flipping through the pages. Will you read them to me? Please? Peter, Miss Zimmerman just got back, Matthew chided gently. Let her catch her breath before you start making demands. It's all right, Olivia assured him. I'd be happy to read to you, Peter. Perhaps after dinner. The boy nodded enthusiastically and ran into the house, clutching his new treasure to his chest. Matthew shook his head with an indulgent smile as he helped Olivia down from the wagon. You've made a friend for life, he said. Peter loves books more than anything, but he struggles with reading on his own. Sarah used to read to him every night. I'm happy to continue the tradition while I'm here, Olivia replied. It's the least I can do to repay your kindness, Mrs. Holloway, a plump, gray-haired woman with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner, greeted them at the door. There you are, finally. I was beginning to think you'd run off with the poor girl, Matthew Cooper. We had errands to run, Mrs. Holloway, Matthew explained patiently, used to the housekeeper's forthright ways. Miss Zimmerman has secured employment at the Dawsons Mercantile. Mrs. Holloway assessed Olivia with approving eyes. Good for you, my dear. Better than ending up married to Arthur Blackfield, God rest his soul. He was a decent man, but his house was a disgrace, and he couldn't cook anything that didn't come straight from a can. Mrs. Holloway, Matthew warned, but the older woman waved off his concern. No sense dancing around the truth. Miss Zimmerman had a lucky escape, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. She turned to Olivia with a kindly smile. Now, come along and help me with dinner. I'm making chicken and dumplings, and an extra pair of hands wouldn't go amiss. Olivia found herself ushered into the kitchen, where Mrs. Holloway put her to work rolling out dough for dumplings while she continued a steady stream of conversation, filling Olivia in on all the pertinent details of Willow Creek society. The Dawsons are good people, she confirmed as she chopped vegetables for the stew. Jacob can be stern, but he's fair-minded. Elizabeth comes from money back east. Her father owns a shipping company in New York. Surprised everyone when she married Jacob and moved out here, but they seem happy enough. Mrs. Holloway went on to describe the other notable residents of Willow Creek: the sheriff who had lost an arm in the war but could still outdraw most men with his remaining hand. The young doctor fresh from medical school in Philadelphia, who was struggling to win the trust of locals accustomed to healing themselves. The widow who ran the hotel and was rumored to have a special relationship with the town mayor, despite his having a wife tucked away in Denver. And what about Matthew? Olivia asked when she could finally get a word in. He seems well respected in town. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. Matthew Cooper is the finest man in this county, and I don't say that lightly. He's had his share of hardship, losing Sarah the way he did, but he's never let it embitter him. Raised that boy of his to be just as decent, too. He mentioned that Sarah came west as a mail-order bride, Olivia said, careful to keep her tone casual. That she was originally intended for someone else. That's right. Old Mr. Prescott nearly had an apoplexy when she refused to go through with the marriage, but Sarah knew her own mind. Said she wouldn't marry a man old enough to be her grandfather, no matter what the contract said. Mrs. Holloway chuckled at the memory. She was working at the hotel when Matthew started courting her, most romantic thing this town had seen in years. They sound like they were very happy together, Olivia observed, feeling a strange pang that she couldn't quite identify. They were, Mrs. Holloway confirmed, which makes it all the more tragic that she was taken so young, Influenza is a cruel disease. Took Sarah in less than a week, despite the doctor working day and night to save her. Olivia glanced out the window where she could see Matthew chopping wood with powerful, efficient strokes. He's done well, raising Peter on his own. He has, though it hasn't been easy. That boy needs a mother's influence, especially now that he's growing up. Mrs. Holloway gave Olivia a meaningful look. Matthew could use a wife too, though he'd never admit it. Heat rose to Olivia's cheeks. Mrs. Holloway, I've only just arrived. I hardly know Mr. Cooper. The older woman smiled knowingly. I'm just making an observation, dear. Matthew hasn't shown interest in any woman since Sarah died, yet he brings you home after knowing you less than a day. He was simply being kind, Olivia insisted. I was stranded and distressed. Mrs. Holloway murmured, clearly unconvinced. Well, time will tell. Now, those dumplings won't roll themselves. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with Olivia helping Mrs. Holloway prepare dinner while Matthew and Peter tended to the ranch chores. By the time the meal was ready, Olivia felt more comfortable in the Cooper home than she would have thought possible just a day after her arrival. Dinner was a lively affair, with Peter regaling them with tales of his day's adventures: a frog he'd caught by the creek, a hawk he'd spotted circling overhead, and his progress in teaching the new puppy to fetch a stick. Mrs. Holloway contributed occasional town gossip, while Matthew mostly listened, his eyes crinkling with amusement at his son's enthusiasm. Olivia found herself drawn into the warm family dynamic, answering Peter's questions about Boston and sharing stories of her own childhood. The meal was delicious, the conversation engaging, and for a little while she forgot the circumstances that had brought her to this table. After dinner, true to her promise, Olivia settled with Peter in the main room to read from his new book. Matthew sat nearby in a worn leather chair, ostensibly reviewing some papers related to the ranch. But Olivia noticed he seemed to be listening to the story as intently as his son. She read with animation, giving different voices to the characters and pausing at dramatic moments to build suspense. Peter was an attentive audience, gasping at the right moments and peppering her with questions about sailing ships and pirate treasures. When the boy's eyes began to droop despite his protests that he wasn't tired, Matthew stood and scooped him up. Time for bed, son. Miss Zimmerman can read more tomorrow. But I want to know what happens to the treasure, Peter protested through a yawn. The treasure will still be there tomorrow, Matthew assured him, carrying him toward the stairs. Say good night to Miss Zimmerman and Mrs. Holloway. After Peter had been tucked in, Mrs. Holloway gathered her things to leave. I've left clean linens for you, Miss Zimmerman, and there's bread dough rising for morning. Just punch it down before you go to bed, and it'll be ready to bake for breakfast. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, for everything. The older woman patted her cheek affectionately. You're doing fine, dear, just fine. With a knowing glance between Olivia and Matthew, she took her leave, Matthew escorting her to her wagon. Left alone in the quiet house, Olivia felt a strange mixture of contentment and uncertainty. In just over 24 hours, her life had changed completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges with her position at the mercantile, but for now, she allowed herself to simply appreciate the peace of her surroundings. When Matthew returned, he found her standing by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. It's beautiful here at night, she said without turning. In Boston, the gas lamps and buildings obscure most of the stars. Matthew moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. That's one thing I've always loved about this place. No matter how hard the day has been, you can look up at that sky and remember how vast the world is. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the endless expanse of stars. Olivia was acutely aware of Matthew's presence, beside her the subtle scent of soap and leather that seemed to surround him, the quiet strength he exuded without effort. Mrs. Holloway seems convinced you've been a bachelor too long, Olivia said finally, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left her mouth. I'm sorry, that was terribly forward of me. To her relief, Matthew chuckled. Mrs. Holloway has been trying to marry me off since the appropriate mourning period ended. She means well. She spoke very highly of Sarah, Olivia said softly. Everyone did. She was easy to love. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a gentle acceptance tinged with lingering sorrow. Olivia turned to face him fully. Thank you again, Matthew, for everything you've done for me. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't appeared yesterday. You'd have managed, he said with conviction. You strike me as a woman who finds a way to survive, no matter the circumstances. His faith in her capabilities warmed Olivia unexpectedly. Still, I'm grateful. I'll try not to impose on your hospitality for too long. Stay as long as you need, Matthew replied. The room upstairs has been empty too long, and Peter. He hesitated, then continued, Peter enjoys having you here. Only Peter. Olivia wondered but didn't dare ask. Instead, she nodded and moved toward the kitchen. I should punch down Mrs. Holloway's bread dough before retiring. Matthew followed her, leaning against the doorframe as she worked the dough with practiced movements. You're comfortable in a kitchen. My mother insisted I learn all aspects of running a household, even though we had help. She believed a woman should be prepared for any circumstance. Olivia covered the dough with a clean cloth. I suppose she was right, though I doubt this is what she had in mind. Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Matthew agreed. Sometimes the unexpected turns out better than what we planned. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting, there was a connection forming that neither had anticipated. The moment stretched, then broke as Matthew straightened and cleared his throat. I should turn in. Dawn comes early on a ranch. Sleep well, Olivia. Good night, Matthew. As she prepared for bed in the quiet guest room, Olivia found her thoughts returning to Matthew, his kindness, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It was foolish to develop any attachment to him, she knew. Her stay was temporary, her future still uncertain. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, Olivia couldn't help but wonder if perhaps Mrs. Holloway had seen something that Olivia herself was only beginning to recognize, that sometimes fate led you away from one door, only to guide you toward another that had been waiting all along. The week that followed established a rhythm to Olivia's new life in Willow Creek. Each morning, Matthew drove her into town before dawn, dropping her at the mercantile before continuing to handle his own business in town. Each evening, he returned to collect her, bringing Peter along more often than not. The boy would eagerly share the day's adventures as they made the journey back to the ranch, where Olivia would help prepare dinner, and then read another chapter from the adventure book, Peter hanging on every word. Working at Dawson's mercantile proved more satisfying than Olivia had expected. Mr. Dawson was indeed particular about how his store was run, but he was also a patient teacher, showing Olivia the inventory system, the ordering process, and how to handle the various types of customers who frequented the establishment. Mrs. Dawson, despite her advanced pregnancy, was a cheerful presence, taking Olivia under her wing and introducing her to the women of Willow Creek who came to shop. Under her guidance, Olivia learned the complex social hierarchy of the small town, which families had been there since the territory was settled, which were newcomers still proving themselves, and which maintained a precarious hold on respectability. "You're catching on quickly, Mrs. Dawson commented on Olivia's fifth day as they unpacked a shipment of fabric. "Jacob says your bookkeeping is the most precise he's seen." "Thank you," Olivia replied, pleased by the praise. "I enjoy the work more than I anticipated." Mrs. Dawson smiled knowingly. "And how are things at the Cooper Ranch? I notice Matthew seems more cheerful these days when he comes to town." Olivia busied herself with arranging bolts of calico to hide her blush. "Everyone has been very kind. Peter is a delightful child. And Matthew," Mrs. Dawson pressed gently. "The two of you seem to get along well." "Mr. Cooper has been a perfect gentleman," Olivia replied carefully. "I'm grateful for his assistance while I get established here." Mrs. Dawson's smile widened. "Of course, I'm simply making conversation." She winced suddenly, pressing a hand to her side. "Goodness, this little one is active today." Concerned, Olivia moved to her side. "Should I fetch Mr. Dawson or the doctor?" "No, no," Mrs. Dawson assured her with a small laugh. "Just normal movements. Though I must say, I'll be glad when this baby decides to make an appearance. Another 3 weeks seems an eternity." The bell above the door jingled, and both women looked up to see Sheriff Miller enter the store. He nodded politely to them, removing his hat as he approached. "Mrs. Dawson, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted them. "Fine day, isn't it?" "Indeed, Sheriff," Mrs. Dawson replied. "What can we help you with today?" "Just need some tobacco and perhaps a word with Miss Zimmerman, if that's all right." Olivia's heart quickened. "With me, Sheriff." "Nothing to worry about," he assured her. "Just wanted to check that you're settling in all right. It's my job to look after folks in this town, especially newcomers who arrived under unusual circumstances." Mrs. Dawson excused herself to help another customer, leaving Olivia alone with the sheriff. He was a tall man with graying hair at his temples and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. Despite missing his right arm below the elbow lost at Gettysburg, according to Mrs. Holloway, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. "I understand you're staying out at Cooper's place," the sheriff said, his tone conversational but his gaze assessing. "Yes, temporarily," Olivia confirmed. "Mr. Cooper kindly offered his guest room while I establish myself in town." "Matthew's a good man," Sheriff Miller nodded. "One of the best in the county. Still, there's been some talk." Olivia stiffened. "What kind of talk?" The sheriff's expression was sympathetic rather than accusatory. "Small towns run on gossip, Miss Zimmerman. A mail-order bride arriving for one man and leaving with another makes for interesting conversation, especially when the first man is newly buried." "I didn't know Arthur Blackfield was dead when I arrived," Olivia said defensively. "And Mr. Cooper has been nothing but respectful and helpful." "I don't doubt it," the sheriff assured her. "I'm not here to accuse, just to advise. If you're planning to make a life in Willow Creek, you should know that reputations matter here. Living under a single man's roof, even with the best of intentions, can make things difficult." Olivia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and indignation. "Mrs. Holloway is there regularly, and I've secured employment and lodging at the Mercantile. I intend to move into the room above the store as soon as it's prepared." Sheriff Miller nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. Like I said, I'm not here to judge, just want to make sure you're aware of how things might be perceived." He selected a pouch of tobacco from the display. "I'll take this, please." As Olivia wrapped his purchase, the sheriff studied her thoughtfully. "You know, Arthur Blackfield left no kin. His place will likely go to auction soon unless someone puts in a claim. Might be worth looking into, seeing as you were meant to be his wife." The suggestion startled her. "I don't understand. How could I possibly have a claim?" "Sometimes the court takes a broad view of these arrangements, especially out here where formal marriage contracts can be flexible. You traveled all this way on the understanding that you'd be his wife. Might count for something." Sheriff Miller paid for his tobacco and replaced his hat. "Just something to consider, Miss Zimmerman. Good day to you." The sheriff's words lingered in Olivia's mind throughout the afternoon and into the evening. When Matthew arrived to collect her, she was unusually quiet during the ride back to the ranch. "Something troubling you?" he asked eventually, glancing at her with concern. Olivia hesitated, then decided direct honesty was best. "Sheriff Miller came to the store today. He mentioned there's been talk in town about my staying at your ranch." Matthew's expression darkened. Miller should mind his own business. "He was actually quite kind about it," Olivia clarified. "He was simply advising me of the potential impact on my reputation, and yours." Matthew was silent for a long moment, his hands tightening slightly on the reins. "Does it bother you, what people might be saying?" "I'd be lying if I said it didn't," Olivia admitted. "I came west hoping for a fresh start, not to become the subject of town gossip." "The room above the store will be ready soon," Matthew said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Dawson mentioned they're clearing it out this week." "Yes, she told me the same." Olivia studied his profile, trying to decipher what he might be thinking. "The sheriff also mentioned something else that took me by surprise. He suggested I might have some claim to Arthur Blackfield's property, given our arrangement." This caught Matthew's full attention. "Did he now? That's interesting." "Is such a thing possible?" Matthew considered this. "Territory law can be adaptable out here. A mail-order bride arrangement is essentially a contract, and you fulfilled your end by traveling west. Could be the court would recognize that, even though we never actually met, never married. It's not unheard of for a judge to rule favorably in such cases, especially for a woman alone in a new territory." Matthew glanced at her. "Would you want his property if you could claim it?" Olivia had been pondering this very question since her conversation with the sheriff. "I don't know. It seems presumptuous to claim ownership of a stranger's home and land. Think of it as claiming what was promised to you," Matthew suggested. "Arthur invited you west, with the understanding that his home would become yours as well. His death doesn't necessarily invalidate that promise." They fell silent as the wagon crested a hill, the Cooper Ranch coming into view in the distance. The setting sun bathed the buildings in golden light, making the modest homestead look almost magical. "I'll speak with Judge Porter next time he's in town," Matthew said finally. "He handles most of the legal matters in the county. He can advise you properly on whether you have a legitimate claim." "Thank you," Olivia said softly. "You've done so much for me already, Matthew. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." Matthew's expression softened as he looked at her. "Seeing you find your footing here is repayment enough. And—" he hesitated, then continued with a slight smile. "Peter has been happier this past week than I've seen him in a long time. Having you around has been good for him." "He's a wonderful boy," Olivia said warmly. "You've raised him well." "I've done my best," Matthew replied, a touch of uncertainty in his voice that Olivia had never heard before. "But there are things a boy needs to learn from a mother that I can't provide." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniably present. Before Olivia could formulate a response, the wagon rounded the final bend, and Peter came running out to meet them, effectively ending the moment. That night, after dinner and the now customary reading session with Peter, Olivia found herself unable to sleep. She stood by the window of her room, gazing out at the moonlit landscape, her mind turning over the events of the day and the complex feelings that were developing within her. In just over a week, Willow Creek had begun to feel less like a strange outpost and more like a place she could belong. The work at the mercantile gave her purpose, and the connections she was forming with the Dawsons, with Mrs. Holloway, with Peter gave her a sense of community she had feared she might never find again after her parents' deaths. And then there was Matthew. Olivia could no longer deny, even to herself, that she was developing feelings for the quiet rancher. His strength, his kindness, his dedication to his son, all these qualities drew her to him in ways that her letters with Arthur Blackfield never had. When Matthew looked at her with those warm eyes, or when their hands accidentally brushed as they worked side by side in the kitchen, Olivia felt a connection that both thrilled and terrified her. But was it too soon? She had come west to marry one man, and now found herself attracted to another barely a week after her arrival. Would acting on such feelings make her appear fickle or opportunistic? And what of Matthew? Did he share her growing affection? Or was he simply being kind to a woman in need? The sound of quiet footsteps in the hallway drew Olivia from her thoughts. She opened her door slightly to find Matthew checking on Peter, tucking the blanket around his sleeping form with gentle hands. The tenderness of the gesture made her heart ache. Matthew turned and saw her watching. He stepped away from Peter's room, closing the door quietly behind him. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he whispered. "Peter has nightmares sometimes. I check on him before I turn in." "You didn't disturb me," Olivia assured him. "I was having trouble sleeping." Matthew studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. "Something on your mind?" "So many things," Olivia thought, but instead she said, "Just thinking about everything that's happened since I arrived. How different my life is now from what I expected." "Different in a bad way?" Matthew asked, his voice soft but intent. Olivia shook her head. "No, just different." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Matthew took a small step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stepped back. "We should both get some rest," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Morning comes early." "Yes," Olivia agreed, though she made no move to return to her room. "Matthew." "Yes." His eyes held hers, waiting. Courage failed her at the last moment. "Thank you again, for everything." A fleeting expression of disappointment crossed his features, quickly masked. "You're welcome, Olivia. Good night." "Good night." As she closed her door, Olivia leaned against it, her heart racing. What had she almost said? What had she wanted to say? That she was beginning to care for him. That she wondered if he might care for her too. It was too soon, too uncertain. Better to wait, to be sure of her own heart and his before risking words that couldn't be taken back. With a sigh, Olivia returned to bed, though sleep remained elusive for much of the night. In the darkness, her thoughts continued to circle between the possibilities before her, the chance to claim Arthur Blackfield's property and establish herself independently, or the growing connection with Matthew and Peter that promised a different kind of future altogether. By morning, she had reached no conclusions, but as she joined Matthew and Peter for breakfast, Olivia knew that whatever path she chose, Willow Creek was already beginning to feel like home in a way Boston never had. The following days brought a flurry of activity that left Olivia little time to dwell on her conflicted feelings. Mrs. Dawson went into labor 2 weeks earlier than expected, sending the mercantile into temporary chaos, as Mr. Dawson rushed his wife to the doctor's home in the middle of a busy morning. Olivia found herself suddenly in charge of the store, handling customers, receiving deliveries, and trying to maintain the meticulous standards Mr. Dawson expected. "You're doing admirably," Judge Porter told her on the third day of this arrangement, as she carefully recorded his purchase of tobacco and writing paper. He was a portly man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness that made him respected throughout the county. "Jacob's lucky to have found such a capable assistant." "Thank you, Your Honor," Olivia replied, grateful for the validation. "Have you heard any news about Mrs. Dawson and the baby? Last I heard, mother and daughter are both doing well. Jacob said they've named her Charlotte." The judge accepted his parcel and leaned slightly on the counter. "I understand you might be seeking legal advice regarding Arthur Blackfield's property." Olivia glanced around the empty store before responding. "Sheriff Miller suggested I might have some claim, given our arrangement. I'm not certain it's appropriate, but it was promised to you as part of your agreement," Judge Porter finished for her. "I've reviewed the situation, and in my opinion, you have reasonable grounds for a petition. Blackfield left no will and no known relatives. His closest kin was a cousin in Ohio who's already written to say he has no interest in the property." Hope stirred in Olivia's chest. "So it would be possible for me to claim it." "Possible, yes. Not guaranteed, but I'd give you favorable odds. The territory courts tend to look kindly on women seeking to establish themselves honestly." The judge stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Of course, taking on a ranch is no small undertaking for a woman alone." "I understand that," Olivia said. "But if the alternative is the property being auctioned to strangers?" Judge Porter nodded. "Come by my office when you have a free afternoon. We'll draw up the necessary papers. The hearing would likely be scheduled for the circuit court's next session about a month from now." After the judge left, Olivia found her mind returning to the possibility of owning Arthur Blackfield's ranch. It would mean independence, a home of her own and land that could provide a living if properly managed. Yet it would also mean leaving the Cooper ranch, leaving Peter, leaving Matthew. The thought brought a sharp pang that Olivia couldn't ignore. In the 2 weeks since her arrival in Wyoming, her feelings for Matthew had only deepened. They had fallen into an easy companionship, working side by side on evening chores, talking about their days, sharing quiet moments on the porch after Peter had gone to bed. Sometimes she would catch Matthew watching her with an expression that made her breath catch a mixture of admiration, desire, and something deeper that neither of them had put into words. Yet Matthew had made no declaration, had not spoken of feelings beyond friendship. Perhaps he saw her only as a temporary guest, a woman in need of assistance rather than a potential partner. Or perhaps, as Mrs. Holloway had suggested, he simply wasn't ready to open his heart again after Sarah's death. These thoughts occupied Olivia as she closed the mercantile that evening, carefully counting the day's receipts and locking them in the small safe beneath the counter. She was so absorbed in her musings that she didn't notice the man watching her from across the street, not until she locked the store's front door and turned to find Drake Simmons approaching, his unsteady gait and flushed face indicating he had been drinking heavily. "Well, if it ain't the mail-order bride," he slurred, moving to block her path. "Heard you been staying out at Cooper's place. Mighty friendly of him to take you in." Olivia stiffened, keeping her expression neutral despite her racing heart. "Good evening, Mr. Simmons. If you'll excuse me, I need to be on my way." She attempted to step around him, but Drake shifted to remain in her path. "Not so fast, pretty lady. I'm just being sociable." He leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Wonder what Cooper's getting in return for his hospitality." "Man doesn't take in strays without expecting something back." "That is quite enough," Olivia said firmly, her fear giving way to anger. "Mr. Cooper is a gentleman, which is clearly more than can be said for you. Now step aside." Drake's face darkened. Getting mighty high and mighty for a woman who came here to sell herself to one man and ended up with another. Before Olivia could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, Miss Zimmerman?" She turned to find Sheriff Miller approaching, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. Relief flooded through her. "Mr. Simmons was just leaving, Sheriff." Drake glared at the lawman but knew better than to cause further trouble. "No problem at all, Sheriff. Just welcoming the lady to our fine town." "Consider her welcomed," Sheriff Miller replied dryly. "Now I suggest you head on home and sleep it off, Drake." With a final resentful glance at Olivia, Drake stumbled away toward the saloon. The sheriff watched him go before turning back to Olivia. "Are you all right, Miss Zimmerman? Did he harm you?" "No, just frightened me a little," Olivia admitted. "Thank you for your timely intervention. Just doing my job." The sheriff glanced down the street. "Cooper not picking you up today. He had business at a neighboring ranch." "I told him I would wait for him inside the store, but Mr. Dawson asked me to close up early since business was slow." Sheriff Miller nodded. "I'll wait with you until he arrives. Wouldn't be right to leave you alone after that encounter." True to his word, the sheriff remained with Olivia, making casual conversation about the town and its residents until Matthew's wagon appeared at the end of the street. When Matthew saw the sheriff standing with Olivia, his expression immediately turned concerned. "Is everything all right?" he asked as he brought the wagon to a stop beside them. "Just a small unpleasantness with Drake Simmons," Sheriff Miller explained. "Nothing serious, but I thought it best to wait with Miss Zimmerman until you arrived." Matthew's jaw tightened. "What did Drake do?" "Just some inappropriate comments," Olivia said quickly, not wanting to escalate the situation. "The sheriff handled it. For now," Miller added, "but you might want to be careful, Cooper. Drake's been running his mouth at the saloon, saying things about you and Miss Zimmerman that aren't fit for polite company." Matthew helped Olivia into the wagon, his movements gentle despite the anger evident in his expression. "I appreciate your looking out for her, Sheriff." "Just doing my job," Miller repeated. "You folks have a good evening." As they pulled away from town, Matthew remained unnaturally silent, his knuckles white on the reins. Olivia could practically feel the tension radiating from him. "It really wasn't as bad as the sheriff made it sound," she said finally. "Mr. Simmons was drunk and rude, nothing more." "What exactly did he say to you?" Matthew asked, his voice carefully controlled. Olivia hesitated, reluctant to repeat Drake's crude insinuations. "He implied that there was an improper arrangement between us, that you wouldn't have taken me in without expecting something in return." The muscle in Matthew's jaw twitched. "I should have been there. I shouldn't have left you alone in town." "You can't be with me every moment," Olivia pointed out reasonably. "And I handled the situation well enough until the sheriff arrived." "That's not the point," Matthew insisted. "Drake Simmons is a mean drunk with a history of causing trouble if he's fixated on you." "On us," Olivia corrected gently. "His comments were about both of us, Matthew, about the arrangement we've had these past 2 weeks. Matthew fell silent again, processing this. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with regret. "Maybe the sheriff was right that first day. Maybe your reputation would have been better served if you'd stayed at the hotel instead of coming to my ranch." The word stung more than Olivia expected. "Do you regret offering me shelter?" "No," Matthew said firmly. "Never that. I regret that it's caused you difficulty in town. That people like Drake feel entitled to make assumptions about you, about us." "People will always talk," Olivia said. "Even if I had stayed at the hotel, they would have found something to gossip about the mail-order bride whose intended husband died before she arrived." "Still," Matthew persisted, "it might be for the best if you move into the room above the store sooner rather than later. Mrs. Dawson mentioned it's nearly ready." Though his suggestion was perfectly reasonable, exactly what Olivia had been planning all along, she felt a sharp disappointment at the thought of leaving the Cooper ranch, leaving the comfortable routine they had established, leaving Matthew. "If that's what you think is best," she said finally, unable to keep a hint of hurt from her voice, Matthew glanced at her, his expression softening. It's not about what I want, Olivia. It's about what's best for your future here. If you're going to build a life in Willow Creek, you need to start from a position of respect. And living under your roof damages that respect, in some people's eyes, yes. Matthew sighed heavily. It's not fair, but that's the reality. They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the ranch, Peter came running out as usual, but even his excited chatter about his day couldn't fully dispel the tension between them. That evening, after Peter had been put to bed, Olivia found Matthew sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure if her company would be welcome. "You can join me," Matthew said without turning, somehow sensing her presence. "I don't bite." Olivia settled into the chair beside him, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I've been thinking about what Judge Porter told me today, about Arthur Blackfield's property." Matthew turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "What did he say?" "That I have a reasonable claim, and he's willing to help me file the necessary papers." Olivia traced a pattern on the arm of the chair with her fingertip. "The hearing would be next month when the circuit court is in session." "That's good news," Matthew said, his tone neutral. "You'd have a place of your own." "Yes, my own home, my own land." The idea still seemed slightly surreal to Olivia, though I'd need help managing it, at least at first. "There are good men in the area who could be hired to help with the heavier work," Matthew suggested. "Or you could consider selling it once it's legally yours. Use the money to establish yourself however you choose." Olivia shook her head. "I didn't come west looking for a temporary solution. I came to build a life here. On Arthur Blackfield's ranch." There was something in Matthew's voice she couldn't quite identify, a question beneath the question. "On my own ranch," Olivia corrected. "If the court grants my petition." Matthew was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the distant horizon. "You'd be about 5 miles from here. Close enough for Peter to visit if you wouldn't mind." The thought of not seeing Peter regularly created an ache in Olivia's chest. "I'd like that very much. I've grown quite fond of him." "He's grown fond of you too," Matthew said softly. "He asks every day if you'll be staying for dinner, if you'll read to him again. He'll be disappointed when you move into town." "It's only temporary," Olivia reminded him, "until the court makes its decision." Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken thoughts and feelings. Olivia gathered her courage, deciding that honesty, however difficult, was necessary. "Matthew, these past 2 weeks have meant a great deal to me. You and Peter both. I don't want to leave, but I understand why it's necessary." Matthew turned to her, his expression now clearly visible in the light spilling from the house windows. There was a vulnerability there that caught Olivia by surprise. "It doesn't have to be necessary," he said, his voice low and intense. "There's another solution." Olivia's heart began to race. "What solution?" Matthew reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm and slightly calloused, the touch sending a shiver up her arm. "Marry me," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and unexpected despite the growing connection they had both felt. Olivia stared at him, unable to formulate a response through her shock. "I know it's sudden," Matthew continued when she remained silent. "I know we've only known each other 2 weeks, but I've felt something growing between us, Olivia, something I haven't felt since Sarah died, something I never expected to feel again." "Matthew," Olivia finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain? This isn't just because of what happened in town today, or because of Peter." "Peter is part of it," Matthew admitted honestly. "He needs a mother, and he's already half in love with you and your stories. But no, this isn't just for him." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "When I saw you standing alone at that train station, something told me you were meant to be in my life. I've spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself it was too soon, that you needed time to adjust to Wyoming, to decide what you wanted. But today, when the sheriff told me about Drake accosting you, all I could think was that I should have been there to protect you, that I want to be there to protect you every day." Emotions flooded through Olivia: joy, uncertainty, hope. "I've felt it too," she confessed. "This connection between us, but marriage is such a serious step." "I don't make the offer lightly," Matthew assured her. "I'm asking because I care for you, Olivia, because I believe we could build a good life together, because when I think of my future now, I can't imagine it without you in it." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelmed emotion. "What about Arthur Blackfield's property? The claim I might have?" "That would still be yours," Matthew said. "Your property, separate from the ranch. You could sell it or keep it as security for your future." "Whatever you decide." "Our future," Olivia corrected softly, "if we were to marry." Hope dawned in Matthew's eyes. "Is that a yes?" Olivia took a deep breath, searching her heart and finding her answer there, clear and certain. "Yes, Matthew Cooper, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was unlike anything Olivia had ever seen. Matthew stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. One hand came up to cradle her face, his touch infinitely tender. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Olivia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a sweet exploration, but it quickly deepened as weeks of unacknowledged desire surged between them. Matthew's arms tightened around her waist, drawing her closer as Olivia's hands found their way to his shoulders, then into his hair. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that days ago," he murmured. Olivia laughed softly. "Better late than never, Mr. Cooper." A sound from inside the house made them both turn. Peter stood in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of them embracing. "Pa," he said uncertainly. "Miss Zimmerman." Matthew kept one arm around Olivia's waist as he extended the other to his son. "Come here, Peter. I have something important to tell you." The boy approached cautiously, his gaze darting between them. "Are you mad at each other? I heard talking." "No, son, we're not mad," Matthew assured him with a smile. "In fact, it's quite the opposite. Miss Zimmerman has agreed to marry me." Peter's eyes grew even wider. "Really? You're going to be my new ma?" The directness of the question brought tears to Olivia's eyes. She crouched down to Peter's level, taking his small hands in hers. "If that would be all right with you, Peter, I care for you and your father very much." For a moment the boy said nothing, his young face serious as he processed this momentous news. Then, with the impetuousness of childhood, he threw his arms around Olivia's neck. "Yes, I've been hoping you would stay forever." Olivia hugged him close, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Over Peter's shoulder, she met Matthew's gaze, seeing in his eyes all the love and hope she felt in her own heart. In that moment, on a porch in Wyoming territory, thousands of miles from where she had begun her journey, Olivia Zimmerman knew she had found her home at last. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, a simple ceremony performed by Judge Porter in the Cooper Ranch house. Mrs. Holloway had insisted on making Olivia's dress a lovely creation of pale blue silk that complemented her eyes and honey blonde hair. Peter stood proudly beside his father, holding the simple gold band that Matthew would place on Olivia's finger, his young face solemn with the importance of his role. The small gathering included the Dawsons with their new baby daughter, Sheriff Miller and his wife, and a few neighboring ranchers who had come to respect Matthew over the years. Even Mrs. Holloway's perpetually stern expression softened as Judge Porter pronounced Matthew and Olivia husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the judge concluded with a smile. Matthew needed no further encouragement. He gathered Olivia close, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. A cheer went up from the assembled guests, Peter's voice the loudest among them. As they turned to face their friends as husband and wife, Olivia felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, a feast prepared by Mrs. Holloway, music provided by one of the neighboring ranchers who played the fiddle with surprising skill, and plenty of good wishes for the newly formed Cooper family. Later, as the guests began to depart, Olivia found herself standing on the porch with Mrs. Dawson, watching as Matthew and Peter bid farewell to the last of the neighbors. "I've never seen Matthew look so happy," Mrs. Dawson observed, cradling baby Charlotte against her shoulder. "Not since before Sarah passed." "I hope I can be worthy of him," Olivia said softly. "Of both of them." Mrs. Dawson smiled knowingly. "Love isn't about being worthy, my dear. It's about being willing to work through the hard times, to celebrate the good times, and to build something lasting together." She glanced down at her sleeping daughter. "The best things in life are rarely easy, but they're always worth the effort." As the evening shadows lengthened, Peter finally succumbed to exhaustion after the excitement of the day. Olivia tucked him into bed, her heart swelling as he sleepily called her Ma for the first time. "Good night, my sweet boy," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Sleep well." When she returned downstairs, she found Matthew waiting for her, his eyes warm with love and desire. Without a word, he extended his hand to her. Olivia took it, following him up to what was now their bedroom, the master chamber that he had shared with Sarah, now transformed with fresh paint and new curtains that Mrs. Holloway had helped Olivia prepare in the days leading up to the wedding. "Are you happy?" Matthew asked as he closed the door behind them. "Truly happy." Olivia moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Matthew tipped her chin up, searching her face as if memorizing every detail. "When I saw you at that train station, crying because no one had come for you, something told me you were meant for me instead. I tried to fight it, told myself it was too soon, that you needed time. But every day that passed only confirmed what I felt from the beginning." "And what was that?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "That sometimes fate takes unexpected turns. That sometimes the person you're meant to find isn't the one you set out looking for." His hand caressed her cheek tenderly. "That sometimes love arrives in ways we never anticipated." Olivia rose on her tiptoes, bringing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. As Matthew's arms tightened around her, deepening the kiss, Olivia gave silent thanks for the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment, to this man, who had claimed her heart so unexpectedly and completely. 1 month later, Judge Porter presided over another legal matter, the petition for Olivia Cooper, formerly Olivia Zimmerman, to be granted ownership of Arthur Blackfield's property based on the original mail-order bride agreement. To everyone's surprise, the judge not only approved the petition but did so with unusual enthusiasm. "The territory needs more women of substance and character," he declared to the small courtroom. "Women who are willing to build lives here and contribute to our growing community. Mrs. Cooper has demonstrated both qualities in abundance, and I can think of no better steward for the Blackfield property than she." With that decision, Olivia found herself the legal owner of a modest but well-maintained ranch 5 miles from her new home with Matthew. After careful consideration, she and Matthew decided not to sell the property but to develop it as a complementary operation to the Cooper Ranch. "We could raise horses there," Matthew suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Peter attempt to teach their new puppy to fetch. "The pastures are well suited for it, and there's always demand for good stock." "I'd like that," Olivia agreed, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "A place that's ours together, but still honors Arthur Blackfield's legacy in some way." Life settled into a new rhythm for the Cooper family. Olivia continued to work part-time at the Mercantile, particularly after Mrs. Dawson decided to devote herself fully to motherhood. She divided her remaining time between managing their household, helping with the ranch books, and teaching Peter his lessons. The boy thrived under her guidance, his natural intelligence flourishing as she introduced him to literature, mathematics, and natural sciences. Word spread about Olivia's teaching abilities, and soon neighboring families began sending their children to the Cooper Ranch 3 days a week for instruction. What had begun as informal lessons for Peter evolved into a small but proper school, with Olivia as teacher to 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. "You've brought education to Willow Creek," Sheriff Miller commented one afternoon when he stopped by to deliver mail. "The town council is talking about building a proper schoolhouse next year, with you as the official teacher if you're willing." "I'd be honored," Olivia replied, "though I'll need to discuss it with Matthew first. The ranch and our family must remain my priorities." Those priorities expanded 6 months later when Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought tears to Matthew's eyes and whoops of excitement from Peter at the prospect of becoming a big brother. "A baby sister would be nice," Peter declared with the assurance of an 8-year-old who believed his opinions carried considerable weight. "I already know how to do boy things with Pa, but a girl would need me to teach her everything." Matthew laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "We'll take whatever blessing God sends us, son." As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Drake Simmons made one final, ill-advised attempt to cause trouble for the Cooper family. Drunk and belligerent, he accosted Matthew in town, making crude remarks about Olivia, and insinuating that Matthew had stolen another man's bride. For once, Matthew's legendary self-control faltered. The resulting fistfight was brief but decisive, ending with Drake unconscious in the street and Sheriff Miller suggesting that Matthew take his bruised knuckles home before formal charges became necessary. "You shouldn't have fought him," Olivia chided gently that evening as she tended to Matthew's split knuckles. "Sheriff Miller could have handled it." "Some things a man needs to handle himself," Matthew replied, wincing slightly as she applied antiseptic. "Drake Simmons has been asking for that lesson for years. I was just the one who finally delivered it." Olivia shook her head, but there was no real reproach in her expression. "My gallant defender," Matthew captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Always, Olivia, always." 3 weeks later, Drake Simmons left Willow Creek for good, heading north to the Montana gold fields in search of better prospects. Few in town mourned his departure, and many quietly thanked Matthew Cooper for being the catalyst that had finally driven the troublemaker away. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. As winter approached, Olivia's time grew near. The baby, seemingly impatient to join the world, arrived during the first snowfall of the season, a daughter with Matthew's warm eyes and a dusting of honey-blonde hair that promised to match her mother's. "Sarah," Matthew whispered when the midwife placed the tiny bundle in his arms. He glanced at Olivia, a question in his eyes. "Sarah Olivia Cooper," Olivia confirmed with a tired smile. A beautiful name for a beautiful girl. Peter, allowed into the bedroom after the birth, approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation. "She's so small," he observed, peering at his new sister with cautious fascination. "But she'll grow," Olivia assured him, "and she'll need her big brother to watch over her." Pride straightened Peter's shoulders at this important assignment. "I will. I promise." As winter settled over Wyoming territory, the Cooper family found themselves cocooned in the warmth of their home and their love for one another. On Christmas Eve, with baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Peter dozing by the fire after an exciting day of holiday preparations, Matthew drew Olivia close as they stood by the window, watching snow drift gently past. "Happy?" he asked, the word carrying all the depth of his love. Olivia leaned back against his chest, savoring the security of his arms around her. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about that day at the train station, how lost I felt, how certain I was that everything had gone wrong. And now—" She turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "Now I know it was the beginning of everything going right. No one came for me that day, Matthew Cooper, but you did. You came, and you changed my life forever." "No," Matthew corrected gently, brushing a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face. "We changed each other's lives. You brought light back into mine when I thought the darkness would never lift." Their kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the love that had grown between them, a love born from an unexpected meeting on a dusty train platform, nurtured through shared experiences and challenges, and now blossoming into a future filled with promise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the Cooper family, Matthew, Olivia, Peter, and baby Sarah, had created their own sanctuary against the Wyoming winter and whatever challenges life might bring. They had found in each other the greatest gift of all, a love that had come unexpectedly, but would endure through all the seasons of their lives together.